So the last couple of things we want to talk about are, I'm just going to go over the defocus thing real quick because I think I missed it. So we'll just cover it real quick in case you guys are trying to recreate that and you're a little bit confused. So if you create a Z defocus, there's no depth maps to this picture. You could give it one, but we're not going to do that. We're just going to basically do it from scratch. So basically all I did was I took a Z defocus, and you can just plug it in directly to the picture. And you know, like I said, we don't have a depth map, so it's kind of just using the size. And then there's a maximum size as well, so you can increase that if you want to make it even blurrier. But you know, we're not going to need to worry too much about it because we're not going really out of focus. So basically all I did was I set a keyframe at 2.75 at the start and 1 at the end. So that's really all I did to get him kind of out of focus at the start and then coming into focus at the end. And I switched the filter type to bladed because that's the same filter that we used on the background to create those type of star kind of bladed effect. So that's pretty much it for that. We don't really have to change any other settings there to create that fake Z focus rack focus. So the other thing we could talk about is I'm going to talk about lens flares, grading, and then the grain. So kind of finaling this comp, and if there's something else we need to talk about, we'll probably do a separate video, but I think that's pretty much it. So for the flares, what you can do, one technique of creating some lens flares, which kind of just helps, you know, giving some extra interest to the shot, you know, kind of putting something kind of coming across the frame, some lens flares. All you do is I took the foreground and stenciled it out of the background, and I key out the highlights. So I create an alpha from the highlights. And I increased the saturation of them just to make them a little bit more colorful, and I kind of pre-multiplied it. So now we just have the highlights by themselves without all the other colors. And essentially what you can do is put a convolve node, and you put a shape into the convolve node. So whatever shape you use, that's going to take that shape and kind of push it through the highlights. So if I look at that picture, it's kind of copying the circle everywhere and taking the highlight color and stretching it. So that's what a convolve does. So if you take a small shape, we can even do something like this, where we make them a little bit thinner. And if we just do something like that and we put a convolve, you're going to see that we get these like stretchy highlights. And sometimes you actually want that type of a look. Some shows, depending on what kind of camera you're using, anamorphic cameras will have sort of these stretched lens flares like this. And that's more of a stylized look if you're not shooting on anamorphic. But you know, sometimes it can give you something kind of cool. Like here, it looks kind of interesting. You're getting these like light leak type of lens flares. Maybe it's not cool on the really bright areas, so you could sort of can control where you're getting those lens flares. So you could just go here with a stencil, and for example, you could just cut out the areas that are a little bit too bright. You know, something like this, and then you could kind of just, you know, or maybe just mix it down so you have a stencil, and you know, maybe you just want less lens flare on that area, something like that. And that's kind of cool. It gives us some interest, and we got some stuff going on. I didn't play the effect that strong. I kind of just did it as this, just a very, very subtle effect, because we already have this glow as well. So it's up to your personal preference. I wouldn't crank it up like super crazy because that's just going to be kind of annoying to watch. And that's always kind of a joke, is that compositors push these things too far. So, yeah. And then the last thing I did was some shot grading. So I just plugged in our footage and a little bit of a gain and gamma down to darken it, and then a slight blue tint as well. Doing a little bit of a tint at the end will help bring things together as well. If your colors are very slightly off or something like that, it just kind of helps smush everything together. And then I did an F regrain to add grain at the end. So we're not using the original plate grain because you know, we transformed this footage, meaning we kind of scaled him and did a bunch of stuff, and that kind of ruins the grain when you do stuff like that. But we can just add a fake grain at the end, and that's fine. So I also did a little bit of QC fixes on the edges here. We might even need a little bit more in terms of, you know, bringing back that edge. So, of course, you can go here and just adjust your white point and, you know, sort of create a core matte for that area. So, essentially, you can go in and do those little areas if that's if you're wanting to get a really, really accurate key. So, you kind of just fix some areas like that. And That's basically it. The F-regrain in the settings, just to let you guys know, you can, I forgot to mention it, there's some preset stocks. So F-regrain, it's a little bit better than the grain node. The grain node has kind of one type of grain pretty much, and you know, it's just not the best. But if you use a F-regrain, you can plug it in and you can switch the stock. So there's different types of cameras here. So and we're working in 2K, so you can pick one of these ones that says 2K at the end, and you know, just pick one that suits your preference. And that's pretty much it. So you can take the grain amount and bring it way down. So we're exposed way up here. So if we go back to normal exposure, you know, we can do something like that. So that's what I've done. I've kind of went in here, and that really helps blend your edges as well. So that's something that is really important for integration. Don't forget to put grain on your shot, because all cameras have grain, and it sort of helps blend all these edges together. So there's little areas we could go through and fix. One thing I'd like to mention is sort of glow painting, I guess you could call it. So, you know, something like this, again, that's really not pleasant on the eye. So what you could do is, you know, we have a glow that we're applying. So if I go to before the grain and we just look at the glow that we're adding some glow on some highlights, but it's not catching some of those. So what you could do is kind of go through and find areas that would benefit from this sort of adjustment. So we still have some QC to do as well, so I guess I can talk about that in another lecture after this. But we'll do the glow painting first. So kind of what that is it's really simple. You just want to go before all the transform stuff. And we just want to go on certain highlights to blend edges, to make them maybe a little bit brighter or darker, to kind of seamlessly hide things like this. So we can put a roto shape around that and kind of brighten it. And by doing that, it's going to start picking up the glow that we've created. So if I start to push this a little bit further, you know, we can start to maybe push that light a little bit more. And if we look at the normal exposure, you know, maybe that's just a little bit more interesting. So we disable it, and we have something like that, and we enable it, we have something sort of like that. So just kind of bringing some of these edges, especially areas like this, you know, maybe there you'd want to go improve your key, but maybe we could just, you know, put a soft shape here and kind of add some glow. Maybe that would be interesting compositionally. So we can go there and, you know, start to play around with different areas. Again, you're going to draw attention to areas that you do this, so maybe that's not the best area, because it looks like our key's a little bit sharp there or something like that. We could go fix that, but maybe an area like this would be good. So we have this little light. Maybe we could just add a couple of little spots here to make this light a little bit more interesting. So we could add some little adjustments. So I'm just duplicating this, and we'll see. That's a little bit too bright there, but let's just play around with it. So something like that. Maybe we could even add a little bit more just on this part, because it looks a little flat. So I'll just add a different shape and sort of grade that differently than this side. So you go here and just gain it up or multiply it up. And I'm going to go to the background and just make sure I'm affecting the right area, because it looks like we're not. And maybe I'll isolate that to the highlight area as well. So I'll just go in here and sort of make a mask and just mask that across the roto. Something like that, and then blur it out so it kind of blends, and then we'll just go back to our final image and see how that looks. Might be too much. Yeah, it's kind of a lot, but let's just... Yeah, we could sort of make that a little bit less. And then also what we could do is, sometimes I like to break it up a little bit, so maybe it feels like there's some bulbs in here rather than just one neon beam, and that might just give it some variation. Of course, you could brighten up the building and do all kinds of stuff if you're trying to really paint this composition in a certain way. You know, something like that is a little bit more interesting. And let me go back. And you could add a little bit of color to it maybe. Maybe that's, you know, that might be drawing the eye too much, so I'll just bring it down a bit. So if we just compare, you know, before and after, we have some little areas that seem a little bit flat maybe, and we're just kind of popping them. So that's some little things you can do, and that's kind of like painting the glow. Like I said, that's what I would kind of call it. So I'm just looking around at other areas you could potentially do that to. So one thing I would do is definitely I would go through and check for those value conflicts. So like areas like this, even though there's like a value contrast, that's not necessarily bad. Value contrast is not bad. I would call them value conflicts. Whereas like this, well, we'll let it play again, but yeah, we'll let it play through here for a second. Maybe I'll pre-comp this. I'll let this play and then we'll talk about it, just to identify some areas. Because areas like this, I would try to hide. Like that doesn't look good. So you see I keep going back to it, and maybe here still a little bit weird. We could boost the brightness of that a little bit more. Let's just try to boost that up. But we'll keep some of the other areas a little bit less. So maybe these guys, we could keep them lower just by lowering the opacity. And then maybe that guy's a little brighter. So, and that kind of, it might be slightly too bright now. So it's a lot of back and forth. But you can really tell a story with where the light is going. So like having it a little bit brighter is not bad, because that's actually where we want to sort of be looking, is sort of in the direction of this guy. So you could put some soft light there. You could also, you could go here with a radial and maybe just even bring some light behind his face, because it's a little bit hard to read his face on this frame. So, you know, because we have such a dark background and a dark character. So we could go here and sort of, you know, we could just pretend that maybe there's a little bit of a light casting up on that building there. So we could do like a bit of a multiply on this area. Maybe a slight gamma even. And even though it looks weird on the background, we're thinking about our shot in the end. So if we go here and we look at the end, let's just close all this. That's way too much. Looks a little bit unnatural. Let me just pull it back a bit and something like that. So now you see, just by doing a little bit of a soft pool of light, if I disable and I enable, you see it just really bring out the edge of the person, so we can read the expression just a tiny bit better. Maybe we could bring it up just a tiny bit more. We could even do that a little bit more. So let's put another radio here. So this is all creative stuff now. This is all subjective. You can do whatever you want. But for me, I'm trying to read this person. I'm trying to tell a story about this person. So I'm going around and, you know, maybe just putting some slight variations in the background where he ends up on this frame. It might even help to put some down here. It just kind of looks nice to have more light in the frame. So we can go around. I like to use radials a lot in my workflow. So, you know, we can go around and just place these spheres of light. And even though you still want to make them look like they make sense, you know, we don't want to have a complete halo around the person, but you know, maybe make this one a little bigger, maybe move it down a little bit. See, this is what I'm talking about, is like a value conflict. It's like when I put it there, if I put it up here, for some reason, it just starts to not look appealing. Something about that just draws your eye in a negative way. So I would just move that down. And those are the kind of things you need to kind of feel out. So if we disable that and enable, we're just crafting an image now. So all we're doing is crafting that image a little bit further. So what we could do as well, let's just try to go back and just see how that looks on the other frames. We want to make sure that it's not going to look weird at the start. So we need to double check that, of course. So if I go back, let's go back to the start frame. So if I disable that and enable, I think it's actually just helping in general. I don't think there's any negative side effect to what we just did. So that's how you can start to craft your image a bit further. Just make sure we're looking at the end of the comp here. I also put a clamp at the very end and put the maximum like 16, just an arbitrary value, but the minimum at 0. Just make sure we don't have any negative values. So you could render this out now and you would have your composite. So I'll do one quick video on QC after this as a final kind of look at this picture. But that's pretty much it for integration. There's more things you could do with this. You know, you could go further. You could add some atmosphere here if you wanted in between. Maybe you could animate some. I mean, you can go as far as you want, really. Sometimes you go too far, sometimes not. But, you know, I think this image as a whole is looking pretty good. And if we compare it to sort of where we started here, this is our foreground plate. Maybe we could copy the transformations just so we could do a before and after type of thing. So we could place it here. And I'm going to put 2 on my keyboard and 1 at the end of the comp. So we have 1 and 2. And then I can just do press W. And if you press W and then you hit, you might not see anything. If you hit Q, make sure your overlay is on. You can wipe between the two, our two viewers here. So if I hit 1 and 2, I can kind of get this and I can sort of wipe in between. And this is a good way to do QC as well. So I'll talk about that just after. So, you know, we could try to restore some detail in different areas. This is a good way to check. But this is also just to see where we went, and I think that's a pretty cool result. So yeah, we'll double check and start doing QC after stuff like this. You see, we've lost a little bit of detail in the highlights in general. Some of this is because of our denoise, unfortunately, and you know, we're scaling and defocusing our image, so we might lose some of that. We could do something to bring it back potentially, but you know, in this case, we might not focus completely on every single detail for this, as it's not necessary for learning to QC to that level. But yeah, for integration, I think he sits in there pretty well. And we'll just make sure we crop it as well. Our bounding box is quite large if we go to the end. So we see there's a lot of pixels going on out there. So what you could do, like for example, on merge over here, we could say, set the bounding box to B. And we could put a crop node here, just so we're not kind of having extra pixels all the way around our comp. And if there's anything else down here, like the blur, you see the blur is making our bounding box bigger. And then everything else is being processed after. So, you know, what we could do is just put a crop after the blur again. And then on these guys, you just set the bounding box to B, so that when we add stuff over the top, it's not expanding those pixels outside. And that's just going to make your script sort of faster, even though we're kind of close to finish here. Those are good practices to have. So yeah, I'll go on to the next video and we'll talk about some QC.